Before we officially begin our journey of discovery, please type your dream on the screen. The following content contains a large amount of information. Please listen carefully and drift into a peaceful sleep. In another universe, Earth takes on a completely different form. Manhattan is no longer a metropolis of skyscrapers, but instead, a natural forest of vast oaks and hickories. In the forest, small, tree-dwelling dinosaurs are carefully tending to their eggs and hatchlings that have just emerged. The young dinosaurs are passed from branch to branch, while the older ones leisurely sunbathe, their eyes always wary, gazing towards the sky. Because above the treetops, the sound echoing through the air is not the chirping of birds, but the screeching roar of pterosaurs. With sharp teeth, they spread their leathery wings, riding the rising warm air currents to slowly circle before suddenly diving down on their prey. With precision, giant solitary predators spread their wings, casting a shadow that covers the sky. Below, in the winding rivers, pods of long-bodied, snake-headed plesiosaurs gather to hunt for fresh fish. Farther south, in the deep waters of the bay, relatives of the giant mosasaur are gathering to mate, letting out deep, rumbling calls. In this reptile-dominated world, there are still some birds, fish, and small mammals, but they can only live a life of furtive hardship on the fringes of every habitat. The descendants of these terrible lizards, that is, the dinosaurs, still occupy the top of the food chain on land, in the air, and in the sea. This completely different future for our planet stems from an event that occurred millions of years ago, or rather, because that event did not occur. In that parallel universe, 66 million years ago, an asteroid skimmed past Earth at a speed of about 45,000 miles per hour. The giant dinosaurs roaming the Earth, at that time, it just looked like a star streaking across the sky. The dinosaurs continued their lives, and would never know they had just narrowly escaped an extinction-level event. But that's not what really happened. It's no exaggeration to say that Earth at the end of the Cretaceous period was dominated by dinosaurs. Dinosaurs and their relatives had existed on Earth for nearly 180 million years. However, at that time there were other animal groups, but they had to live in the shadow of the giant reptiles. By the late Cretaceous, the lineage of birds had begun to diversify. Bird-like dinosaurs, primitive birds, and some early modern birds coexisted. Small, primitive mammals scurried for cover under the feet of dinosaurs. Coral reefs formed by mollusks, much like modern reefs, attracted countless species of fish, sharks, as well as crustaceans like lobsters and crabs. It was truly a biodiverse ecosystem, just one where dinosaurs were a bit overrepresented. However, the late Cretaceous Earth was not stable. The Indian subcontinent was repeatedly colliding with Asia, causing repeated eruptions from a massive volcanic region, lasting for about 2 million years, spewing out huge amounts of lava and greenhouse gases. As a result, ecosystems began to change and evolve. Many dinosaur species that once dominated the Earth were gradually declining, but at least in North America, the numbers of these terrible lizards remained high, until a catastrophe from space struck. In 1980, Nobel Prize-winning physicist Luis Alvarez, along with his son, geologist Walter, and chemists from the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in California, discovered the first conclusive clue about the dinosaurs' extinction. They studied a thin layer of sediment between the Cretaceous and the subsequent Paleogene periods, and discovered that the concentration of the metal iridium was astonishingly high. This element can be found in the boundary clay layer all over the world, but the strongest signal is near Mexico. Iridium is extremely rare in the Earth's crust, because it is a siderophile element, which tends to bond with iron. So when the Earth was formed, most of the iridium sank with the iron into the core. This resulted in extremely low levels of iridium in the Earth's crust. So, when Alvarez's team discovered the spike in iridium, they knew this iridium must have come to Earth after the planet had formed, precisely 66 million years ago, the moment when the fate of the dinosaurs took a decisive turn. From this, they inferred that a comet or asteroid had collided with Earth After breaking apart, it spread the element it contained across the globe, while also putting an end to the age of dinosaurs. This asteroid, the size of an entire city, was formed beyond the orbit of Jupiter. It had probably traveled through space for thousands of years, orbiting the Sun, until its orbit unfortunately intersected with Earth's. It slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula at 20 kilometers per second, at an impact angle of 60 degrees to the horizontal plane, and shattered into pieces. In the process, the collision released an amount of energy equivalent to more than 1 billion atomic bombs exploding at once, triggering a magnitude 11 earthquake that made the Earth ring like a bell. The blast caused atmospheric temperatures to soar to thousands of degrees Celsius, staining the sky red and causing global wildfires. Rock around the impact site was vaporized, spreading through the air. The Earth's crust was punctured, creating a giant crater over 180 kilometers wide and up to 20 kilometers deep, forming a crater rim with mountain ranges taller than the Himalayas. The destructive force of the impact itself was the worst event on Earth in billions of years. But what was truly fatal were the long-term effects that followed. Cold gas and dust from the impact formed a thick fog, blocking out the sun, and causing an impact winter that lasted up to 15 years. Temperatures in the tropics dropped sharply to 5 degrees Celsius. However, the most devastating thing was the lack of sunlight. Without light, plants could not grow, leading to the collapse of the global food chain. Herbivores and carnivores starved to death one by one. After the cold and darkness came a terrifying heatwave. The immense energy from the impact oxidized carbonate rocks at the impact site, releasing carbon dioxide and causing a severe greenhouse effect that lasted for about 100,000 years. This fatal blow from space caused the fifth mass extinction event since the appearance of animals. Up to 3/4 of the animals on Earth were wiped out in an instant, including all non-avian dinosaurs, flying reptiles and large marine reptiles. Even the ammonites, which had long dominated the oceans, also vanished. On land, no animal weighing more than 25 kilograms could survive. The world thereafter belonged to small omnivores, including mammals, birds, and lizards. They survived by eating carcasses and plant debris. However, after the climate crisis of the early Paleogene, the ecosystem gradually began to recover. The seeds and pollen of flowering plants were very resilient, helping them recover faster and gradually replace the more primitive gymnosperms. Grasses also began to evolve, later becoming an important part of the new ecosystem. On land, the size of animals remained small for thousands of years. Birds were the first animals to regain large sizes, but many of the early large bird species later also went extinct. It wasn't until 15 million years after the end of the Cretaceous that mammals larger than a pony appeared on Earth. In the oceans, with the exception of sea turtles and crocodiles, all other marine reptiles disappeared. Fish populations were dominated mainly by sharks and bony fish. Eventually, bony fish became the most numerous organisms in the ocean. Therefore, from the late Cretaceous to the early Paleogene, the biosphere on land, in the air, and in the sea underwent one of the most dramatic transformations in history. The changes that occurred during this period shaped the biological world that we live in today. And all of this originated from a destructive event from the distant cosmos. However, the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event was perhaps not the only time cosmic forces brought extraterrestrial devastation, disrupting the course of evolution on Earth. In the more distant past, from a place even farther away, there may have been an even more devastating event that created an invisible impact on one of Earth's 5 great mass extinctions. 445 million years ago, the late Ordovician mass extinction, second in scale only to the Permian-Triassic extinction, was an incredibly complex event that occurred in 2 distinct phases. Ultimately, about 85% of marine species and more than half of all genera disappeared. This was a brutal pruning of the animal kingdom's tree of life, which had only just been flourishing. For less than 100 million years after the Cambrian explosion, many species of brachiopods, trilobites, graptolites, and early vertebrates like conodonts were driven to extinction, completely different from the late Cretaceous mass extinction. The late Ordovician extinction event did not lead to a major taxonomic restructuring, although many species, genera, and even entire families disappeared. There were still members of these groups that survived and continued their lineage. In a sense, this pruning of the evolutionary tree removed most of the leaves, and the small twigs, and even some of the larger branches. But all the main limbs remained intact. Perhaps that's why the cause of this first great mass extinction of the Paleozoic era has never been fully understood. The leading hypothesis is a severe ice age, followed by a period of warming and ocean anoxia. Geological evidence shows the main continent at the time, Gondwana, was at the South Pole, and underwent continental glaciation, similar to modern-day Antarctica. The biological communities of that time were accustomed to warm, tropical waters, so the sudden cooling of the climate was a fatal blow. When temperatures finally rose again and the ice melted, it in turn caused a lack of oxygen to spread throughout the ocean basins, lasting for up to 3 million years, dealing a second fatal blow to the survivors. It's not hard to understand why the environment at that time could lead to the extinction of so many organisms on Earth, but what initially caused the ice age and the anoxia is still unclear. Most researchers believe it was the result of a combination of factors. Perhaps it was the evolution of land plants and phytoplankton, leading to an unprecedented consumption of carbon dioxide. Perhaps it was a sudden halt in volcanic activity, meaning carbon dioxide was not replenished. Or perhaps it was increased weathering of new mountain ranges and carbonate rocks that also absorbed carbon dioxide from the air. All of these factors, combined, reduced the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, weakening Earth's greenhouse effect, and plunging the planet into an ice age. However, even when combining all these explanations, they still cannot fully explain the scale and suddenness of the Ordovician event. Therefore, scientists have begun looking for other, more extraordinary explanations. For example, a giant circular landform in southeastern Australia was recently identified as having formed at the exact time the extinction began. It might be an impact structure with a diameter of up to 520 kilometers. Whether it is the remnant of another deadly asteroid or not remains to be seen. However, there is another possibility that is just as intriguing: that this extinction was not caused by a rock from space, but by cosmic radiation. Billions of years after the largest stars begin to shine, they die in a violent explosion, known as a supernova, releasing dust and radiation. We see their afterglows through telescopes. They are flashes of visible light and bursts of radiation. As long as a supernova explosion doesn't happen too close to us, they are nothing more than a magnificent spectacle in the night sky. But there is a type of cosmic explosion capable of causing much greater devastation. It can bring death from thousands of light years away. This is the gamma-ray burst. In the 1960s, satellites used to monitor nuclear explosions on Earth accidentally discovered gamma-ray bursts. As its name suggests, this is an intense, short-lived burst of high-energy gamma rays, focused into a narrow beam. It can last from less than 2 seconds to several minutes, and produces an extremely powerful stream of radiation. The brightness of the burst is certainly hundreds of times greater than a supernova, and for a brief moment, its brightness can be 1,000,000 trillion times that of the Sun. The origin of these spectacular bursts is still a mystery. They might come from the supernova explosions of the largest stars, as they die and collapse into a black hole, or they could come from the collision of two neutron stars, super dense. In any case, these events are extremely rare in a galaxy, perhaps only occurring a few times every million years. The most powerful gamma-ray burst we have ever observed, and officially named the brightest of all time, was detected in October 2022. It came from a galaxy 2.4 billion light-years away from us. But even at such a vast distance, when its beam of rays reached Earth, the radiation intensity was still strong enough to overload satellite detectors. It produced measurable effects. 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 It produced measurable effects.
La ricachona sintió lástima por el chico. El chico recogió un ladrillo del suelo y lo partió en dos. Así que le preguntó al chico qué sabía hacer. Así que le preguntó al chico qué sabía hacer. Así que le preguntó al chico qué sabía hacer, proclamando que tenía mucha fuerza. La ricachona, al ver esto, se lo llevó a casa sin decir una palabra. Pero los alumnos no lo trataban como a una persona. Pero los alumnos no lo trataban como a una persona. Pero los alumnos no lo trataban como a una persona. Pero los alumnos no lo trataban como a una persona. Pero los alumnos no lo trataban como a una persona. Pero los alumnos no lo trataban como a una persona. Resulta que fue precisamente por su fuerza descomunal. 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 Sin un lugar a donde ir, el chico tuvo que vagar y vivir de la basura. Sin un lugar a donde ir, el chico tuvo que vagar y vivir de la basura. Sin un lugar a donde ir, el chico tuvo que vagar y vivir de la basura. Sin un lugar a donde ir, el chico tuvo que vagar y vivir de la basura. Sin un lugar a donde ir, el chico tuvo que vagar y vivir de la basura. Sin un lugar a donde ir, el chico tuvo que vagar y vivir de la basura. Trajo consigo a dos expertos muy poderosos, proclamando que hoy habían venido. 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 Pero la ricachona sabía que el maestro tigre tenía expertos. Pero el maestro tigre no se tragó el cuento de la ricachona. Pero el maestro tigre no se tragó el cuento de la ricachona. Pero el maestro tigre no se tragó el cuento de la ricachona. Pero el maestro tigre no se tragó el cuento de la ricachona. Pero el maestro tigre no se tragó el cuento de la ricachona. No había vuelta atrás, pero la ricachona, que era una mujer de armas tomar, no se dejó intimidar. Dijo que si el maestro tigre quería llevarse el gimnasio. Dijo que si el maestro tigre quería llevarse el gimnasio, tendría que demostrar que era capaz. Tendría que demostrar que era capaz. En un momento les enseñaré lo que es un verdadero ring. Se abalanzó sobre el maestro tigre diciendo que le iba a romper los dientes. Y realmente iba a hacerlo, pero la. Y realmente iba a hacerlo, pero la. Y realmente iba a hacerlo, pero la. Ricachona volvió a detener al entrenador. Ricachona volvió a detener al entrenador. La ricachona dijo que estaba dispuesta a pelear con el maestro tigre. Si ella perdía, le daría el gimnasio. Si ella perdía, le daría el gimnasio. Si el maestro tigre perdía, se largaría con su gente. Se largaría con su gente. El maestro tigre también aceptó las condiciones de la ricachona. El maestro tigre también aceptó las condiciones de la ricachona. La primera en salir al ring fue una mujer. La primera en salir al ring fue una mujer. Su fuerza también era considerable. Su fuerza también era considerable. El gordo fue derribado de un solo golpe. 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 El chico vio que la situación era muy mala. El entrenador no pudo aguantar más. Sin embargo, esta vez, el otro lado envió a su luchador más fuerte. La fuerza de este tipo era aterradora. La fuerza de este tipo era aterradora. La fuerza de este tipo era aterradora. Debido a su terror. Debido a su terror. Tú, mocoso que ni siquiera ha echado el pelo. Tú, mocoso que ni siquiera ha echado el pelo. Tú, mocoso que ni siquiera ha echado el pelo. Tú, mocoso que ni siquiera ha echado el pelo. No andes por aquí balbuceando. No andes por aquí balbuceando. Este entrenador tan temperamental. Este entrenador tan temperamental. Este entrenador tan temperamental. Este entrenador tan temperamental. No sé cómo llegó a ser entrenador. No sé cómo llegó a ser entrenador. Con dos fuertes puñetazos, lo dejó dormido. Con dos fuertes puñetazos, lo dejó dormido. Viendo que la pelea estaba decidida. 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 No toques mi contrato. Tu hermano mayor de armas tenía razón. 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 Pero aceptamos la derrota. Pero aceptamos la derrota. Pero aceptamos la derrota. Entrenador tan temperamental. No sé cómo llegó a ser entrenador. No sé cómo llegó a ser entrenador. Con 2 fuertes puñetazos, lo dejó dormido. Con 2 fuertes puñetazos, lo dejó dormido. Viendo que la pelea estaba decidida. Viendo que la pelea